Hi, I'm Fred Satilli, and this is the podcast for the Voters Union of Accountability Nation. This is episode 19, and the subject is the national debt. And the big question here is, why do we have one? People accept that we have one, but why? And the answer is really simple. We have one because of credit. We borrow money to do things. You have to ask yourself, is everything that we're borrowing money for, is it a good, productive thing, or is it a great big waste of money? It's a fundamental question. We want to do good things with the money that we borrow. If you borrow $100,000 to open up a business, and the business prospers and you make $1 million, well, that was a real good reason to borrow that money. If you borrow money to do something that's a failure, the Solyndra comes to mind. I think we borrowed $50 billion and we gave it to a bunch of irresponsible people and they wasted it and ran off with it. And somehow it left you and me with a giant debt that we had to pay interest on. And we still haven't paid that off and we're still paying interest on it. So that's a really, really bad use of credit. Now, I want you to understand, this is cash. This is not wealth. This is an IOU. It's a debt instrument. It's something that was printed up as a promise to give you whatever that paper will buy. If you want to get, corn or wheat or steel or concrete or something, you need a whole bunch of these. But these are not real. These are just an IOU. Now, I like to say that the government prints those, but the government doesn't print those. They're printed by an outside agency, a licensed agency. And we pay that agency to do that, and we pay them a lot. And I do not understand why we do that. Okay? It really doesn't make any sense. It seems like it should be first of all, most cash isn't even printed on paper. It's just put into a computer. A bank says, I want $1 billion to lend to people to buy houses and cars, and this organization sends them, electronically, okay, well, now you have this amount of money. You can lend it, start collecting interest on it, and start paying us interest on it. And for some reason, we're paying interest to this third party. These are people, we don't know their names, we don't know where they live, they're not our friends. We just pay them, and we really pay them well. And you got to ask yourself, how did something like this get started? It seems stupid, and it is. But back in 1913, a bunch of world bankers, some were Americans, some were the Carnegies or I can't remember the names right now, but they got together with European bankers like the Warburgs, and they came up with this idea for the Federal Reserve. And then probably the stupidest guy that ever lived, the Democrat president, Woodrow Wilson, he signed an agreement to make this happen. Now, no sooner did he do this that he realized how bad it was, and he regretted it. In fact, I'm going to read his quote. I am a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is controlled by its system of credit. Our system of credit is concentrated. The growth of the nation, therefore, and all our activities are in the hands of a few men. We have come to be one of the most ruled, one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the civilized world. No longer a government by free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and the vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men. Isn't that incredible? Reparation is a big point of conversation now, today. And reparation for this form of slavery is owed to us all. It's owed to every age, every race, every gender, every man, woman, and child in America has been put into slavery by originally the Democrats and Woodrow Wilson in 1913. And then once they realized the horror of this, they continued to perpetuate it. So this is a reparation owed to all the people from the Democrat government. And when I say the Democrat government, don't get me wrong, I'm including all those people in the Republican Party who are Democrats, because there are very, very few politicians in any party who aren't Democrats. And all those politicians combined owe it to us to repair this problem. Don't be fooled. If you wonder why politicians act in the unproductive way that they do, this form of slavery is at the heart of your answer to that question. Understand this. Our money represents debt. The government owes us stuff. If we ever ask the government to pay us in wheat, corn, coal, oil, steel, concrete, or even services like medical care, or even giving you a tattoo or waxing your car, they couldn't give us 10% of what they owe us for the money that we have. Folks, our money is not wealth. If you have a lot of money, you're not wealthy. Wealth is corn, coal, wheat, concrete, and services, medical care, waxing your car. This is wealth. If you have a country that's producing a lot, it's a wealthy nation. If you have a country that's borrowing a lot, it's an indebted nation. And indebted to who? Man, we don't even know. But I do know this. The debt is theirs. The debt is the government's. It is not yours. These are government debt notes. These are not, you didn't write these IOUs. You're using them to interact with each other, but ultimately the government owes you. Imagine. Where do we get all this money? The government. You lend money to the government yourself. When you pay your Social Security payment that comes out of your pay, in a lot of cases, that's money that you're lending the government. Now, the government, they hoped that in the original Ponzi scheme back in 1913, they hoped to never pay you back. People do die. You know, back in 1913, the average life expectancy was 50 years. Now the life expectancy is 80 years. So instead of having a retirement age at, let's say, 65, where you never made it there and they never had to give you the money that they borrowed from you, now they're going to pay you for 15 years. And part of the horror of it is that most people, the services and the money and everything that they need come in about the last 30 days of their life. Most people, while they're working, they're healthy, and most people are young and healthy. There are people that, they get diabetes or leukemia and they have a terrible medical problem and they need help early on or something. But Medicaid and Medicare and Social Security and all these things get bombarded by the very old. It's usually the last 30 days of your life. Your medical care, 90% of it is realized during that time. So that's something that's hitting the Ponzi scheme really hard. The other thing is productivity. Back in 1913, it was the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and there was so much room in this country for development. Cars and airplanes were just being invented. Movies were just being invented. Major League Sports was just being invented. Recorded music. All these things, the potential was so gigantic, and the population was minuscule in our gigantic country compared to what it is now. People were having 4, 5, 6, or many more children per couple. So all these young Americans were being brought into the system with a huge work ethic, and they would provide money for the old. If you have 6 kids paying Social Security and 2 parents that are collecting it, even if only for a few years, I mean, you got a real winning formula there for collection of a lot of wealth, but that's not what's going on anymore. Now you have people collecting for years and years, and they might have only had 1 child or no children or maybe 2 children, but either way, they're not even replacing the population. Our population growth has stagnated, and that's terrible for the Ponzi scheme that they created that was all part of the idea of slavery through debt. Okay, so we're still going to play along. So the big question is, how much do we owe? Well, immediately we all know we owe 20 trillion, right? That's the national debt to the fake bank. And you know, the one that Woodrow Wilson approved back in 1913. Okay, by the time this podcast is presented, because of the wild card spending of the Wuhan flu, we'd probably throw another 3 to 5 trillion on top of that. Just throw it on there, you know, carelessly, capriciously. That's what we're going to do. Now, in addition to that, which is already horrific, we have made promises, the government has made promises to give money and services to the elderly and the poor and criminals and the non-citizen needy, Muslim invaders, infanticidal maniacs, NPR, countries who hate us, fake governments like the VUAN, and anybody else with an influential lobbyist. And these are commonly called unfunded liabilities, and they come to conservatively $80 trillion, and not conservatively to $200 trillion by some accounts, but we're conservative people, so we're going to go with the 80 trillion figure, knowing full well it's a lot more, and I'll explain why it's a lot more, but we're going to go with 80 trillion just for the conversation. And not included in the national debt and the unfunded liabilities are government organizations like Freddie Mae and Fannie Mac, right? The real estate people. They're $8 trillion in debt. And that money's got to come from somewhere. Guess who? You know, now, in addition to the government, and there's not just Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, there's more government things like that, but we're taking it easy. Now, in addition to that, you have state governments. And the state governments actually give us better figures because states are more manageable. And they have about $8 trillion in unfunded liabilities and debts. You know, and then there's municipalities, towns. We have towns going bankrupt all over the place, right? And they obviously have tons and tons of debt, and we're not even going to use those figures. So what the figures we're going to use, we'll go with the 20 trillion plus the 80 plus the 8 for the state plus the 8 for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac is the only one we're using in the example, but you know there's more. So here we have $116 trillion of conservatively figured debt. Okay, now, if you're going to pay interest on that, even at only 2%, it comes to $2.32 trillion a year. That's $2.32 trillion that we're giving to people we don't know. We don't know their names. They don't educate our kids. They don't build our roads. They don't grow our foods. They don't support our military. All they do is print IOUs, and we pay them an incredible amount of money to do that because we're stupid. We allow this. We allow it. It was a bad idea in the beginning, and it's remained there because the government has found that it can steal an incredible amount of wealth from us all the time, every year, because it has availability of these at no cost. And the cost of these for us is our life. Our life. We work. It's an indenture, an indebtitude, whatever the word would be. And we're indentured servants. We're literally brought into financial slavery. You like to think you're free because you could drive around and go to ball games and stuff, but you are not. At some point in your life, you're going to have to work really hard to get some of these, and you're going to give 2.32 trillion of those to these people who you don't know, who are not your friends. It's out of this world. Now, the federal budget, they like to say that it's $1 trillion, it's just over $1 trillion or whatever it is. Now, we're not collecting that much money in taxes and tariffs, because if we were collecting that much money in taxes and tariffs, we wouldn't have to ask them to print these so we can borrow them so we can pay interest on them. Okay? So the problem here is growing. It's not shrinking. Now, there are many solutions for our financial problems, and some are practical and some are not. But right here, right now, we're going to use the simple tenets of first aid. And if you know anything about first aid, you know that the first thing you do is stop the bleeding. If there's an organism that's injured, you want to make sure that the respiration is good. And if the person bleeds out, they're dead, right? Even if there's not breathing, you got to stop the bleeding and then start the breathing. Stopping the bleeding is exactly what we have to do here. So, this is the Voters Union of Accountability Nation. We want accountability from the people that are perpetuating this really, really bad deal. Now, I want your activism to be geared to stopping the bleeding. We have to reduce the size of government and thereby reduce the spending of government. Right now, we're distracted by every single thing that happens every day. If there's a new bill to infringe on your constitutional rights, everybody's got to go on and beat that up for a couple of days for a news cycle, and it's forgotten, and then it's, oh my God, there's a pedophilia problem, we have to address that, and then in a few days it's forgotten. In the meantime, they keep this rolling. Everything other than this is to distract you from stopping this. Every time you want to express your activism, anytime you're going to talk to a politician, whether it's a town meeting or an email or a phone call or whatever you may do, please, please, you can address individual issues, and that's good, and you should, but don't leave out what are you doing to reduce the size of government. Right now it's election season. Every single candidate should be asked this by every media source, by every independent person, every time they get a chance to talk to somebody. It's, okay, look, we want to stop human trafficking. It's a crime beyond imagination. But we want to stop the slavery of debt. So human trafficking is bad, but even if you manage to stop that, you're still going to have the slavery of debt, right? Taking away your right to defend yourself with firearms is really, 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 really important. You know, if we don't have that, we're not going to have the rest of them. You know the cliche, but in the meantime, the slavery of debt rolls on. It's been rolling on, and you know, we've had guys like Ron Paul and then Rand Paul. They wanted to audit the Fed, but the Fed says no. They tell us to take a walk. Well, I don't understand why we don't tell them to take a walk, because the funny thing about collecting debt is you have to have power to do that. If I owe a guy $100 and he comes to my house and demands his money, and if I don't give it to him, he's going to come in there and punch me in the mouth, I damn well better give him his money. I owe it to him. I got to give it to him, right? He has the power to enforce that. This Federal Reserve is no one. It's not a country. If we tell the Federal Reserve to take a walk, we don't hurt China, we don't hurt India, we don't hurt Russia, we don't hurt Japan, we don't hurt France and Germany, the whole continent of Africa, the whole continent of South America. Nobody gets hurt. The only people that get hurt are these unknown people who don't care about us, are not doing a thing for us. All they're doing is helping the government enslave us with debt, and they're being paid really well to do that. This whole thing is so horrific that the fact that it goes on year after year and is really unaddressed, we're distracted by, Planned Parenthood and all these different things, but the slavery of debt and the reduction of government and the reduction of government regulations and spending is really, really the heart and soul of why we have corrupt politicians to begin with. They're corrupt because there's a whole bunch of this flying around, and most of this stuff shouldn't have been created. So I implore you in your activism to never vote for a politician that won't tell you how he's going to reduce the size of government or the size of government spending. Demand it be addressed by everybody. This is the election season. Everybody running for everything ought to be confronted with this question first and foremost. The other things are all important too, don't get me wrong. I'm not a one-subject guy or anything, but man, oh man, this has been going on. I remember in 2013 when they had the anniversary of the Federal Reserve. You think it would have come to the front page? Everybody would have looked at each other and said, let's not hire another politician that doesn't put a stop to this. But they didn't. We all accept this. We all accept making these payments. We've all been programmed to do this, but we're stupid to do it. And so I've beat this subject into the ground now, and we're probably going to return to it because there's lots of nuances that need to be discussed as separate issues, and they should be, but this is the good overarching immediate stop the bleeding, stop this creation of debt, stop these payments to unknown people. I don't know why we take care of them, but we've decided to do it, and we have to decide to stop. So again, I'm Fred Tilly. Thank you for indulging me and listening to this podcast or watching it on YouTube. I really appreciate it from each and every one of you, and we will talk again. Thank you.